Hey everyone, welcome to Watch It Play Table Talk Back. My name is Rodney Smith, and this is
Pat McDonald, and in this episode, we'll be looking at your responses to tips for teaching games.
And there's a ton of tips in here, so many, I don't know if we can get through all of them. We better dive right in.
We'll do it.
Steven Ziprich writes, allow others to participate in the teaching of the game by having them shuffle cards, organize a collection of game pieces, and explain what those particular components are used for in the course of the game.
Love it.
Getting people to touch the pieces so that they have literal hands-on experience with the game right away can help immensely with keeping them engaged in the instructional aspects of the rules. I think that is a good tip. I don't do that enough, honestly.
Yeah, I like to do that. If there's a bunch of cards, it'll be like, here, you shuffle this, you shuffle this, you shuffle this, and I keep explaining. The only problem I have with it, whenever people get their hands on things, they start to ask questions.
Start looking.
It's like, what's this for? What's this for? It's like, that's the rule number 5. I'd like to, just wait. It's okay.
So there are maybe a couple of little landmines in this tip, but
it's really good.
I like what it's going for, which is just get people engaged in doing something and getting them comfortable in the space of this new game. I like it, Steven. Good one.
Moving on to Peter Fleming. He says, if it's a complex game, I'll write out an outline on how I'm going to cover the rules and in what order. My Fury of Dracula outline was just over a page, but I was able to teach it in about 15 minutes, and only minor exceptions were left out.
I've done this before.
Well, of course.
I do it for the instructional videos, certainly. But even just a game that I'm not doing for the show, that's maybe a little more complex, I have sometimes jotted down notes of little rules that I think are odd exceptions, a little quick overline of here's the order in which I want to teach things, and I'll often just stuff that in the game box so the next time I'm bringing it out to play, it's a little refresher for me as well.
Yeah, and you make little overviews, you make little custom rule books and stuff sometimes too. Yeah.
Like with Dust Warfare and specifically, that was a miniatures game where I took the entire rule book and condensed it down to about 2 pages of smallish print, but it was all there in 2 pages, so I felt it just made it easier for me to not only remind myself how to play, but also teach others. Jake Camps writes, whoa, Rodney, half a Rahdo video? I don't have that much time. I wanted to include this comment because I did make what could have sounded like a little crack at Rahdo there, saying, some people watch half a Rahdo video and then they feel like, okay, I can teach this game now. I wasn't critiquing Rahdo's presentation style because he makes it very clear he's not trying to teach you how to play the game. He's trying to give you a sense of how it works, so then his review has a context and he can also show some gameplay.
You probably only need half the video anyway because that way you'd get the rules in by then.
Right, the front half and the rules, that's true. But I really do think those videos, like Rahdo's, are helpful because if you've read the rules, then you can sort of see it in action, and it reinforces, again, what the rules of the game are, which is great.
Fonto Hanto says, I find it hard when people speak too fast and not clear enough. I need time for the rules and strategies to sink in.
I should have known you were going to do this. This is a simple but good point. Don't talk too fast. I could barely make out what you were saying there. And sometimes this happens when you're teaching a game. You know it so well, you just confidently run through things very quickly and don't give people time to absorb what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and I can really relate to that because when I started doing the instructional videos for you, I really noticed afterwards that my videos came out so much quicker.
Yeah.
And so obviously I must be talking faster.
It's funny because with the scripts that we read, I can usually guess within about 2 minutes how long the final video is going to be. And yours were always a good 4 or 5 minutes shorter than what I estimated. So there was a little bit of okay, I think you're talking a little faster. And I love to listen to podcast content and even other videos at 2 times speed. It allows me to consume.
You probably don't even notice me talking fast.
It sounds about normal to me. But when you're teaching something, you do have to give people time to absorb things. And I think Linus here has a great video contribution that we're going to show you now, talking about other ways you can ensure that you're connecting with the people you're talking to.
My name is Linus. First is know your game. First, I try really to know my game, read through the rules several times if necessary, make notes or put some little post-its in there. Find a good running order. I think a good running order for explaining the rules or writing rules is crucial. This is the most important part for me. If I ever have to go back and say, okay, sorry, I forgot to tell you this 5 minutes ago, then I did something wrong. I had the wrong running order. After the first chunk of rules, after the first bit or first phase, whatever, maybe just ask them, is this okay? You're still following here? Any questions? Can we proceed to the next part? I think that is important. It's also important to look into the phases every now and then. And if some player is there with a big question mark in his face, looking puzzled, just address him and say, everything's okay? You're still following? Do I have to repeat something? I don't want anyone to get lost there. Thanks. See you next time. Bye.
Patrick Doss writes, if a game provides one, I like to use the rules reference card or sheet as a guide in teaching my games. This gives a quick and thorough rundown as to the main bullet points and essential rules and will assist me in my presentation. This is just another good basic tip. if you're looking for what's the best order to teach things in, sometimes having that reference card that tells you here's a round and here's what happens in a round, here's the phases, here's what the steps are to go through a phase.
Yeah, and
just make sure you hit those points.
Point them out one by one too. Say you can do this, you can do this.
Right.
Point at it.
It connects that visual again to what you're saying, which I think for a lot of people helps them latch onto it.
It happened before says if the rules are a bit complex, I may do a dummy round once the rules are taught.
Yeah, this is an interesting idea. Just playing through a sort of stress-free, doesn't count round. It doesn't have to be a complex game.
No, the last time we played Hocus at Game Group with some new players, I did that. I said, let's not worry about the points for this round. Let's just do a round so everyone kind of gets an idea of how the game works.
Yeah, and especially sometimes with a shorter game, it's snappy. It doesn't take up a lot of extra time. I could see maybe with a longer game, this might not always be a great solution. You might just want to give a couple of quick examples of things rather than show an entire round.
And in a strategy game, it might not be the best idea to say, hey, let's look at what everyone's going to do on their first turn and then turn back time.
Yeah, exactly. Trading post games and collectibles rights, I find that using players for the examples does wonders when keeping people's attention. Also, never teach the exceptions and have the game at least partially set up before people arrive. Wow, there's 3 in 1 there. I like this idea of having the game already set up. Setup is not the most engaging and interesting part of the game, typically.
And it's nice to come to a game group and already see the game set up on the table.
That can sometimes draw a person in, right, when they see the visual spectacle as opposed to just an insert full of bagged up components.
Yeah.
What else did he say here? Don't teach the exceptions. I agree for the most part. You can kind of get lost in the weeds if you try to tell a person every exception to every rule. Of course, that one exception you don't tell them is the thing that will be the linchpin to their entire strategy that they'll later blame you for. But
yeah, and I think the most important part too is that especially if you know how to play the game, as soon as you see something coming up that could meet one of those exceptions, that's when you bring it up.
Yeah.
Even if it's 4 turns ahead, be like, oh, it looks like you're doing this. Just so you know, this does not combine with this and work this way.
Yeah,
You'd be like, okay, that's good to know. I'm going to change what I do.
Yeah. I also, and I really like this little part here, using players for the example. In other words, when you're giving an example, if you can use the players' names, Pep, when you attack Sally, here's what's going to happen. People love hearing their own names. It keeps people engaged. Kind of, they perk up a little bit like, oh, what's going to happen when I attack Sally? So, what's going to happen to me when I get attacked? I think that's just a simple, basic, but good tip.
Yeah, that's true, Rodney. And it's something good for just social
What was that you said?
conversations in general.
Yeah, exactly.
Jean-Francois Basset says, a good teaching quote from Einstein, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough.
I like this quote. I wanted to include it because there's a lot of truth to that. If you're trying to explain something and it's getting long-winded, and you're tripping over things, it's probably because you don't really understand it. And taking that little extra time to be able to refine things down to their simplest way of explaining it is always a good idea.
A great man once said, one does not simply teach a board game.
Brandon G writes, nothing bothers me more than when I'm explaining rules and someone is staring into space or sitting on their phone, obviously not paying attention. Come game time, they don't understand something I clearly explained 6 times and say I didn't tell them that.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
What?
Yeah, that's good.
Pep, you should be paying attention. Clearly you don't understand. Let's go to Edward and he'll explain it for Pep.
Don't be a second teacher. We all know the guy who basically played the game one time. He doesn't want to teach the game, but as you're explaining the game, he keeps interrupting you and saying like, oh, that means this, that means this, basically breaking your flow. Don't do that. Second thing is look at the presenter. Trust me, as a presenter and also as a guy teaching games, there's nothing worse than to look out into a bunch of faces looking straight down. And on top of that, they're reading, example, the player aid. And then when you finish teaching a part of the game, they turn out and say like, for example, what's the intrigue phase? When you would have known if you weren't reading the player aid while I was explaining the game.
Before moving on, I just want to mention Edward's point there and Brandon's was repeated by several people. It was probably the most commonly brought up tip for teaching, and it's funny because it's not really a tip for teaching as much as it's a tip for how to learn. In other words, you need to give the person who's teaching you your attention. Otherwise, you're not going to get it, no matter how good of a teacher they are.
That's very true.
So let's move on to the next one. We got one here from
Trevor Cummins.
Yeah.
He says, if it's a game where each player takes turns within a round, I just make sure that I'm the first player during our first game. That way I can explain everything I'm doing during my turn and what options are so that other players can see it all within context.
I like this. It's another great tip. I've seen it done many times. I try to do it myself. If I don't think it's going to give me too much of an advantage in the game, I'll try to be the first player so I can just let everyone see a full turn taking place. I might talk about what I'm doing and explain it, and then other people can even sort of copycat what I'm doing if they're not sure what to do strategy-wise. At the very least, they're getting sort of reinforcement of the rules.
Yeah, and I do the same thing unless it's a game where you don't really do too much on a turn, and then,
Then it doesn't matter so much.
Doesn't really matter, yeah.
But where you can use this, I think it's a great idea. Jonathan Howe writes, I'm sure this will make many cringe, but I mark up the rulebook highlighting key information. That way I can easily scan through when teaching to be sure I've not missed anything.
That hurts my soul.
Rulebook legacy style. I like this. I got no problem with it. There was definitely a time, I know this is a little bizarre for me, there's definitely a time where I worshipped at the altar of keeping my games all pristine. And I do take care of my games, but a rulebook, what I'm trying to do with that is not keep it to sell on eBay later. I want it to be able to facilitate me learning the game and teaching it more quickly. So yeah, I think that's a great idea. Highlight, mark it up, post-it notes, whatever you need to do to help make it more usable for you.
I agree, it's a good idea. It just hurts.
And I appreciate that.
Evil Poser says, my friends and I like to play hands-open rounds that won't count to get an idea of what the game would look like.
Right, so in other words, if you have hidden information, you just play it all on the table, everyone can see what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you can kind of talk about it, I guess, at first.
Yeah, especially a game that has any sort of reactionary plays cards. It's really good to have the ability to say, okay, I'm going to play this, so now you could do this,
Right.
you could do this, you could do that.
Yeah.
And whenever he does that, you could do this. And it gives everyone an idea of exactly what their options are.
The more competitive people at the table might balk at this, like, well, now it's just too easy. But again, you're just doing this like once. Maybe you're just doing it for one round. Again, just to make sure everyone knows what they're doing. And if you are that competitive person, wouldn't you rather compete against people who actually know what they're doing?
Oh, agree completely.
Right? Than people who are just confused and making terrible choices. Pete Spooner writes, when teaching a new game, I usually start by saying what I really like about the game to spark the interest of the group to want to learn more about how the game is played. If it doesn't spark their interest, it's time to pick out a different game.
I want to hear your opinion on this, Rodney.
Well, I like this idea. I do like it because anything you can do, again, just to try to get people invested in listening to you for the next 10 to 15 minutes is a good thing. And so if you can get them excited about the game by, I don't know, selling it a little bit, that's not necessarily a bad idea.
I have a guilty thing I must admit to.
Yes, tell us.
I preface every game I teach with, all right, this is pretty simple. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's...
Game of Thrones 2nd edition.
It could be a complicated war game, and it'd be like, yeah, this is pretty simple. And honestly, I do it because it gets people right into the idea that this is
Right.
simple. If I open up with, this is really complex, guys, listen up, listen very carefully, everything's going to be really difficult, some people are going to approach the game and just be like, oh, I don't understand what's going on.
You're right. There's a funny little car salesman thing going on here. But you do have to be a little careful because if the game is going to be super complex, I like to give people an out. Like a chance to go, what, I think that maybe this game isn't for me, because they realize what they're going into. But again, this is about knowing your audience. That's kind of a rule that goes across the board. If you know that some people will just run at the first sight of a little complication, if they just stayed there with you for 5 minutes, they'd be fine. Then I think that's a good little trick to pull.
Willie Hung says, always, 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 always tell players what the ultimate objective is.
This is another very popular suggestion. I absolutely agree with it. You need to provide people with a context for why you're doing any of the stuff you're doing. So sooner rather than later, make sure you describe the objective.
Yeah, I've had way too many games that I taught, and then by the end, people said, so how do we win?
Right. It's kind of important. Mikkel UK writes, after reading the rules, and you should always start by reading the rules,
Good start.
I always play the game once solo. And I like this because...
Do you shoot first?
Yes, I do, Han. I do shoot first. Nice. I like to do this because even if I have to play all the players myself, again, it just reinforces the rules that I've read.
Yeah, and I'm guilty. I've done that before. I've played games where I play as multiple players, especially when I design a game.
Sure,
I
of
find
course.
that's the easiest way to do it. But I think the trick to make sure it's not boring is insert a different personality into each character. This version of me is a little silly, this one's the smart player, and this one's the chaotic guy who wants to cause as much
Do you get up
trouble.
and go around the table, sit in a different seat?
Oh, you have to, and I put on sunglasses or a glove for different players.
I'd like to watch this. I should record this sometime. That would be delightful. That's not even the best part, though.
Oh.
Even though that sounded like
Go
the best
on.
part. He then says, I then reread the rules.
That's a good point. I find that a lot of times you play a game and then you go and reread the rules afterwards and you notice just a little thing. Maybe it's something that felt off during the game, so you went
Right.
back to double check. And sometimes you just happen to find something that you thought was right.
I almost always miss something the first time through the rules, right?
Definitely.
And so I think most of us do. Rereading the rules once you've played it means that you're no longer focusing on what does all this mean, because you played it. You understand what the rules mean. Now you're just trying to make sure you've done everything correctly. So I think this is a great idea, rereading after playing.
Venron Dua says, I get a sort of stage fright when I teach a game. I will mentally prepare and feel like I know how I want to approach explaining the rules, and then suddenly I get flustered and forget what I wanted to say. I think it's the pressure I put on myself to do a good job so everyone has a good time. If I do a bad job, they may dislike the game and never want to play it again.
This is another one I really liked because it's so true. You definitely feel that pressure of teaching a game. I want everyone to enjoy themselves. I'm excited to be teaching it. And so that heightens one's sense of nervousness potentially, but just adds something else to be concerned about. But also there is a kind of stage fright, right? You're public speaking. You're definitely looking at people who may not be fully engaged in what you're saying, right? And you're trying to win them over. All that stuff can contribute to just all your great plans going out the window.
And it really kind of hurts deep down a little bit when you go to teach somebody something and maybe they just say, oh, I don't really like the sounds of that, or, like, oh, this sounds awful. It's like, oh, is it, or is it just how I explained it?
Right.
Like, maybe I just need to explain it again, because I like this. Are you sure? Don't leave me!
There's so many little things that can throw you off your game, in trying to teach something. So I think being conscious of the fact the person teaching might have some stage fright and doing what you can do to put them at ease can be helpful. This next comment ties into the last one, I think, in an interesting way. Kasha Kunikai says, don't teach games in a high-pressure situation if you're not good at it. I'm not trying to discourage people from teaching games, but if there is someone at the table more qualified to teach the game than you, let them. There's no shame in that. And practice your game teaching skills on your own or on game nights with close friends. Practice, practice, practice. I like this because it's just something practical about it. It can sound a little harsh, but I don't think it's intended to. It's not easy to teach things, and maybe you aren't as good at it as somebody else, and you should just sort of step down and let someone else do it.
Well, yeah, and I think it's important to note the high-pressure situations, too. Maybe you're on a limited time frame.
Right.
Maybe it's clear that there's one player who's just having a really bad day. They really don't want to be taught something half-heartedly. Maybe you just have some new players that are going to have difficulty learning the game.
Yeah.
And all those situations, it might just be better to have somebody more seasoned teach the game.
And I think what Kasha Kunikai is saying here about practice, practice, practice is really good because it is a skill you can develop. And on that note, my daughter Andrea actually has a video contribution about this very topic.
Let's take a look.
Hey everyone, it's me, Andrea, and I just watched the table talk, and I couldn't help but feel that maybe someone was directing this towards me. I will be the first to admit, and my father can second this. I'm not very good at teaching rules. You'd think being around board games and playing lots of them for the good few last years of my life, I'd be good at it, but I'm not. If I am reading the rule book for the first time and then having to relay the information, I struggle with that. But with that being said, it's not for everyone, I don't think, because I think it does take a certain level of confidence and also a certain level of attention of really reading that rule book depending on how heavy the game is. Because even a small short game could have some weird rules or tricks that you have to kind of keep memorized, because you don't want to be constantly looking at the book while you're explaining, because then the other person's going to start looking at the book and being like, why doesn't this person know what they're doing? I know this because my father often looks at the book when I'm trying to explain rules. I'll be explaining them and he'll just be reading them. So, you know what, I just wanted to be the voice for the people out there who are not very good, who want to be better at explaining rules. I do think it's a skill that you can acquire and work on, but don't worry, I'm with you in the same boat.
Andrea, for the record, no, I didn't have you in mind specifically when this topic was brought up, although I appreciate that you maybe recognize a potential weakness in your skill set there, and that's good. It's good to be aware of what you can and can't do well, and also I like the note of optimism. It is something you can improve with some practice.
Noah T. Smith says, have patience. Also, be able to explain a concept in a different method. If a new player doesn't understand a concept, rule, or technique, don't hammer them over the head by reciting the rulebook definition.
Right. Patience is a big thing.
This reminds me.
Yes.
Do you remember that time I was teaching a game to you?
I know exactly which one you're thinking of. I'm thinking of it as well.
And everyone else at the table, I think some people weren't quite sure about the rule.
I know.
But you just couldn't get it. And so I kept going through different ways, pulling cards out, showing examples.
You had exceptional patience.
Yeah.
I remember this because I had to just keep saying to you, I don't understand.
Yeah.
I don't get what you're trying to communicate here. And yeah, finding new and different ways of communicating that information was necessary. Eventually I got it. But you could have easily and very validly lost your patience with me. I commented to you
Yeah, I remember
afterwards.
that, and you commented afterwards. Like thanks for keeping your patience through all that, and that's good. I think that's important that kind of thing happens.
Yeah.
If you do have difficulty, try to understand that they're probably having just as much difficulty understanding as you are teaching.
Yeah, that's right.
And always try to do a different way.
Yeah.
I used to work in a call center too, and heard the same thing. You say something, they don't understand. You don't repeat it. You have to find a different way to say it, a different way to approach it so that they understand.
Right, because ultimately everyone's trying to have a good time. Ultimately everyone's trying to understand, so find the best way to that resolution. Daryl Goodridge writes, I prepare by reading the rules cover to cover. Again, that's been mentioned before, read the rules. Then go online and check out forums, FAQs, and video playthroughs. I like this because oftentimes a company will release a frequently asked questions document to try to clear up some of the things that maybe people had trouble with. So why not go there, right?
Yeah, and there's nothing worse than being in the middle of a game and just having this one question and just needing it answered right away. So yeah, if you're reading and something seems confusing, definitely look it up ahead of time.
Because most times, especially on Board Game Geek, which is a great resource, someone will have already encountered this problem you're having, right? Especially if it's one of the more obvious problems. So you'll find the answer. Oftentimes the designer will have weighed in there. So make sure you check the FAQs and check the forums on BGG.
Elizabeth Howald says, it may seem obvious, but one thing I think is important when learning a new game is to stick to the base game the first couple times before trying to add expansions.
I agree. Expansions are great. Oftentimes they add a little extra flavor to a game.
Yeah.
And sometimes, if you're the one teaching, you've already played the base game a bunch, and so you're looking to spice it up for yourself, but you're adding in extra rules, extra explaining time, more areas for potential confusion. I say, teach the base game, let them learn that, and then throw the expansion in if you've discovered that they enjoy the game.
I agree, and there is the exception if an expansion is very simple, you might throw it in ahead of time.
Right, something that just adds like more of the same kinds of cards or something, but not actual new mechanics. You're right, that could be fine.
I definitely like to judge a game ahead of time if it does have a simple and a complicated version. Which of these is the intended game,
Right.
If the basic game is obviously a stripped down version of the full game, I would probably teach the full game. But if on the other hand, it's the opposite way and the game is very full and rewarding experience, but then the expert version is just very complicated.
Or maybe it's just a slight variant or something. Yeah, that's a good point. You sort of need to judge, am I giving people the best experience of the game? A very stripped down version might not really give them a chance to experience what the game's all about. Proofrock 1977 writes, as soon as I start explaining the rules to my sister, she lets out an exasperated sigh and says, let's just get started. I learned by playing.
Love it.
Hate it. No offense to your sister. I really don't like this attitude. I appreciate where it's coming from on some respect. Some people are visual learners, they learn by doing, etc., etc., etc. But I truly believe 99% of these situations are not people who learn better by doing. They're just impatient. They just don't want to listen to you. They don't want to sit there and have to focus their attention for a period of time. And I apologize if any of you who feel this way, but you aren't that way, I'm not talking about you. But I think there's a certain number of people who they find rules boring. Can we just play and have fun? And it's hard to have fun when the other people at the table want to know how to play the game and you're trying to rush them into the game and they don't really understand it yet.
I especially think, though, with a two-player game, if you're sitting down or just playing a game with another person, if you're sitting down and that person, you do want to do that. You just want to jump into the game and be like, explain the rules to me as we go. I think that can be a lot of fun sometimes.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah,
but especially
like
in a two-player
with two
game.
people.
Yeah, that works. As soon as you got other people, I think you really have to consider the other people at the table, and I find most people want to have some idea of what they're doing before they get started. I know I do.
James Porter says, my best tip is to leave it to the professionals. I had Boss Monster and was rubbish at teaching how to play the game. Lucky for me, my dad had a tablet, so I put on the Watch It Play tutorial of the game, and now my parents are playing the game better than I did.
This may seem a little self-serving to include this suggestion, but that was certainly one of the main intentions of the channel. I always hoped that people could take the videos, the instructional videos, send them out to their friends before a game night, and then their friends could learn the game in advance through a video without having to suffer through a rule book and come to the game ready to play.
Yeah, and I actually did that last week. We were sitting down to play Hocus, and it was trying to be explained by someone, and everyone just wasn't quite getting it. So I said, hey, why don't we just pop on the video? You guys can watch it while we're finishing up this other game. And
learn it that way.
Yeah, learn it that way.
And certainly we're not the only option out there. There's lots of other great channels that can help you learn more about games and understand how to play them. So certainly there's nothing wrong with using the tools that are out there to make learning the game easier. And you guys had a lot of other great suggestions that are in the comments if you'd like to check those out. You can certainly add more in response to what you've seen in this video. But until the next episode, thanks for watching.